6 months after leaving Malawi, Sarah finally published her investigation as part of a coordinated international expose involving news organizations across 3 continents. The story appeared simultaneously in major newspapers in London, New York, Lagos, and Nairobi, making it impossible for any single government to suppress the revelations through legal or political pressure. The impact was immediate and profound. Within hours of publication, the African Union announced an emergency session to address allegations of systematic electoral manipulation across member states. International donors suspended aid programs to countries implicated in the investigation. Most significantly, citizens across Africa began demanding accountability from their governments and electoral institutions. In Malawi, the revelations triggered massive protests as people realized the extent to which their democratic choice had been stolen. The evidence Sarah had gathered, particularly the technical documentation of digital fraud and the witness testimonies from electoral officials, proved impossible for the government to dismiss or explain away. Emmanuel's technical analysis of the compromised electoral software became crucial evidence in legal challenges filed by opposition parties in multiple countries. International cybersecurity experts verified his findings, confirming that identical manipulation systems had been deployed across at least 7 African nations over the previous 5 years. Dr. Munthali emerged as a key figure in the continental movement for electoral reform that grew out of Sarah's investigation. Her documentation of human rights violations related to electoral manipulation became the foundation for international legal proceedings against governments and consulting firms involved in the conspiracy. Sarah's investigation gave us the evidence we needed to prove what many of us suspected but couldn't document. Dr. Munthali explained during a televised interview that reached millions of viewers across Africa. But more importantly, it showed ordinary citizens that they have the power to demand real democracy. The consulting firm at the center of the manipulation network faced criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions and saw its operations effectively shut down by international sanctions. Several of its executives were arrested on charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy to undermine democratic processes. The firm's client list became evidence in dozens of legal cases across Africa and other continents. Faith, the former Electoral Commission clerk whose evidence had exposed the voter registration manipulation, was granted asylum in Canada and became an international advocate for electoral integrity. Her testimony before the United Nations Human Rights Council helped establish new international standards for election monitoring and verification. I never imagined that my small act of copying those files would lead to such massive changes, Faith reflected during an interview from her new home in Toronto. But I'm proud that our suffering in Malawi helped protect democracy for people across Africa. Robert, the motorcycle taxi driver who had documented vote-buying operations, was eventually released from prison as part of a general amnesty following the political upheaval triggered by Sarah's investigation. He returned to his documentation work, now officially supported by international human rights organizations, monitoring electoral processes across the region. The international response to the investigation exceeded even Sarah's expectations. The European Union implemented new aid conditionality requirements specifically targeting electoral integrity. The United States Congress passed legislation requiring detailed vetting of electoral systems in countries receiving American assistance. Several African countries voluntarily invited international organizations to conduct comprehensive audits of their electoral infrastructure. Most importantly, the investigation sparked a continental conversation about democratic governance that transformed political discourse across Africa. Citizens who had previously accepted electoral irregularities as inevitable began organizing to demand transparency and accountability from their governments. In Malawi specifically, the evidence gathered by Sarah's investigation led to the annulment of the manipulated election results by the Constitutional Court. A new election was ordered under strict international supervision, with comprehensive reforms implemented to prevent future manipulation. The rerun election, conducted with unprecedented transparency measures, produced results that reflected genuine popular will. The new Electoral Commission, staffed with officials vetted by civil society organizations, implemented digital verification systems designed by international cybersecurity experts. Every aspect of the electoral process, from voter registration to vote counting, was subjected to multiple layers of verification and public oversight. Dr. Grace Munthali was appointed as chairperson of Malawi's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established to investigate decades of electoral manipulation and other governance failures. Her work with Sarah had prepared her to lead a comprehensive examination of how democratic institutions had been systematically undermined and what steps were needed to rebuild public trust. The courage of one journalist asking the right questions changed everything, Dr. Munthali observed during the Commission's inaugural session. It proved that truth has power even against the most sophisticated systems of deception. The broader impact of Sarah's investigation continued to unfold months and years after publication. Academic institutions across Africa established new research programs focused on electoral integrity and democratic governance. Civil society organizations developed new monitoring capabilities, specifically designed to detect the sophisticated manipulation techniques that had been exposed. Perhaps most significantly, the investigation inspired a new generation of African journalists to pursue investigative reporting, despite personal risks and institutional constraints. Sarah's work demonstrated that careful, persistent investigation could uncover even the most sophisticated conspiracies and create meaningful change. The consulting firm's manipulation techniques, once exposed, became largely ineffective as election monitoring organizations developed countermeasures, specifically designed to detect and prevent such interference. The international attention generated by Sarah's investigation made it much more difficult for similar operations to succeed in the future. James Banda, the Malawi journalist who had first shared evidence with Sarah, was released from prison and received international recognition for his courage in exposing electoral manipulation. He established a regional network of investigative journalists dedicated to monitoring electoral processes and government accountability. Sarah's investigation proved that international cooperation can overcome local intimidation, James reflected. When brave people work together across borders, even the most powerful conspiracies can be exposed and defeated. The story of Malawi's stolen election became a case study in journalism schools and democracy programs worldwide. Sarah's meticulous documentation methods and ethical approach to protecting sources while exposing systematic fraud became a model for investigative reporters working in challenging environments. 5 years after the investigation, democratic governance indicators across Africa showed measurable improvements directly linked to reforms implemented following Sarah's expose. Election monitoring had become more sophisticated, citizen oversight more effective, and international accountability mechanisms more robust. Sarah continued covering African politics, but with a transformed understanding of her role as a journalist. Her investigation of Malawi's election had demonstrated that patient, thorough reporting could not only expose injustice, but actually change political systems and protect democratic rights for millions of people. The real heroes of this story, Sarah often said in interviews about her work, were the ordinary Malawans who risked everything to tell the truth. They reminded the world that democracy is worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. The untold truth behind Malawi's election results had finally been told, and its revelation had changed not just one country, but an entire continent's approach to protecting democratic governance. The investigation proved that no conspiracy, however sophisticated or well-funded, could ultimately withstand the power of truth when brave people decided to expose it. The morning fog hung thick over the ceremonial grounds of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant Michael Torres adjusted his dress blue uniform for what felt like the 100th time. The United States Marine had been selected for an unprecedented honor representing his country during a special joint military ceremony celebrating the long-standing alliance between America and Britain. His hands, calloused from years of service in Afghanistan and Iraq, trembled slightly as he straightened his ribbons and medals. Michael had grown up in a small Texas town where the biggest excitement was Friday night football games. His father worked at the local hardware store, and his mother taught elementary school. Nobody in his family had ever traveled beyond the state lines, let alone across the ocean to stand before British royalty. The Marine Corps had changed everything for him, giving him purpose, discipline, and opportunities he never imagined possible. At 28, Michael had already completed 3 combat tours and earned commendations for bravery under fire. His fellow Marines respected him not just for his courage, but for his ability to remain calm under pressure and his unwavering loyalty to his brothers in arms. Standing at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and an easy smile, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from facing life and death situations and emerging stronger. The invitation to participate in this ceremony had come as a complete surprise. His commanding officer had called him into the office 6 weeks earlier with a mixture of pride and bewilderment on his face. The British government had specifically requested Marines who exemplified the values of both nations, and Michael's record of service had caught their attention. Someone in the Pentagon had recommended him personally, though he never learned who. Now, as he stood in formation with 11 other American servicemen and women, Michael felt the weight of representing not just himself, but his entire country. The British guards around them moved with precision that spoke of centuries of tradition. Their red tunics and bearskin hats seemed almost surreal against the backdrop of the ancient palace walls. The ceremony was meant to commemorate a historic military partnership that had seen both nations fight side by side in 2 world wars and countless other conflicts. Dignitaries from both countries would be present, along with members of the royal family. For Michael, who had spent most of his adult life in dusty forward operating bases and cramped military transports, the grandeur felt overwhelming. As the formation began to move toward their positions, Michael caught glimpses of the gathering crowd. Tourists pressed against the barriers, cameras flashing, trying to capture every moment of the spectacle. British citizens lined the streets, many waving small flags of both nations. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, wide-eyed with wonder at the pageantry unfolding before them. The sound of bagpipes filled the air as the ceremony officially began. Military bands from both countries took turns playing national anthems and traditional military marches. The music seemed to echo off the palace walls, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that gave Michael goosebumps. Despite the warm summer morning, when the American Marines were called to present arms, Michael's training took over completely. Every movement was precise and deliberate, muscle memory from countless hours of drill practice guiding his actions. The weight of his rifle felt familiar and comforting in his hands, grounding him in the moment despite the surreal surroundings. As the formations shifted and realigned according to the carefully choreographed ceremony, Michael found himself facing a line of British Royal Guards. These weren't the ceremonial guards that tourists typically saw, but elite soldiers from various regiments who had earned the right to protect the royal family. Their discipline was legendary, and their dedication to duty was absolute. The morning sun began to burn through the fog, casting long shadows across the ceremonial ground. Michael could feel sweat beginning to form under his dress uniform, but he maintained his composure perfectly. This was what years of military training had prepared him for, the ability to perform flawlessly, regardless of external circumstances. During a brief pause in the proceedings, as dignitaries took their seats and photographers adjusted their positions, Michael allowed himself a moment to truly appreciate where he was. The boy from small-town Texas was standing in front of one of the most famous buildings in the world, representing his country in a ceremony that would be remembered by both nations. His parents would be watching the live broadcast back home, probably recording every second to show their friends and neighbors. The thought of his family watching gave him an extra surge of pride. His younger sister had always looked up to him, and he knew this moment would mean as much to her as it did to him. She had been the one to encourage him to join the Marines when he felt lost after high school. Sensing that he needed something bigger than himself to believe in. As the ceremony continued, Michael noticed the incredible attention to detail in everything around him. The brass buttons on uniforms gleamed in the sunlight. Boots were polished to mirror finishes, and every piece of equipment was immaculate. This level of perfection reminded him why military traditions mattered so much. They represented the dedication and sacrifice of countless men and women who had served before them. The protocols being followed had been refined over decades of diplomatic ceremonies. Each movement, each salute, each position had meaning and purpose rooted in military history. Michael felt connected not just to his fellow Marines, but to generations of soldiers who had participated in similar ceremonies over the years. When the command came to shoulder arms and prepare for the next phase of the ceremony, Michael's focus intensified completely. This was the moment when both formations would march in intricate patterns designed to showcase the precision and professionalism of their respective militaries. One small mistake could disrupt the entire sequence. And failure was simply not an option. The anticipation in the air was palpable as both American and British forces prepared to demonstrate their skills. Before an international audience, Michael could sense the pride radiating from every soldier present, regardless of their nationality. They were united in their commitment to excellence and their respect for the traditions they represented. Little did Michael know that in the next few moments, his life would change in ways he could never have imagined. All because of a single glance across the formation that would alter the course of his future forever. The ceremony concluded with thunderous applause from the gathered crowd, and a final inspection by senior military officials from both nations. As the formations were dismissed, Michael felt a mixture of relief and pride wash over him. The event had been executed flawlessly, and he knew his fellow Marines had represented their country with distinction. Yet, as he moved with his unit toward the designated staging area, he couldn't shake the memory of that brief encounter. Standard protocol dictated that American and British personnel would be kept separate during the post-ceremony activities. There would be formal receptions for the officers and dignitaries, while enlisted personnel like Michael would participate in a more informal gathering before returning to their respective bases. The careful segregation was designed to maintain military protocol and prevent any diplomatic complications. However, fate intervened in an unexpected way. As Michael's group was being escorted toward their assigned area, a mix-up in directions led them through a corridor they weren't supposed to use. At the same moment, Emma's unit was moving through the same passage from the opposite direction. Having been rerouted due to construction work that blocked their usual path, the two groups encountered each other in a narrow hallway lined with portraits of former monarchs and military heroes. Protocol required both units to halt and allow the senior-ranking group to pass first, but determining precedence between American Marines and British Royal Guards proved momentarily confusing to their respective guides. During the brief pause while the situation was resolved, Michael found himself standing directly across from Emma, up close. Without the ceremonial distance of the parade ground, he could see that she was even more striking than he had initially realized. Her eyes were a remarkable shade of green, and there was an intelligence and strength in her expression that spoke of significant experience and capability. Emma, meanwhile, was studying Michael with equal interest. She noted the combat ribbons on his uniform, the confident way he carried himself, and something in his demeanor that suggested both strength and gentleness. She had served with many male soldiers over her career, but there was something different about this American Marine that intrigued her beyond professional curiosity. The moment stretched longer than it should have, with both soldiers maintaining eye contact while their respective units waited for guidance from their escorts. Other Marines and Guards noticed the exchange, though military discipline prevented any overt commentary. Still, meaningful glances were exchanged among the ranks, and more than one soldier suppressed a knowing smile. Finally, the escorts resolved the precedence question, and Emma's unit was directed to proceed first. As the royal guards filed past the Marines, Emma maintained her professional composure, but she allowed herself one final glance at Michael. In that look, he thought he detected something that might have been regret at the briefness of their encounter. After the British unit had passed, Michael's group continued toward their destination, but his mind remained focused on the woman guard. He found himself wondering if he would ever see her again, and the intensity of that curiosity surprised him. In his military career, he had always maintained clear boundaries between his professional duties and personal interests. But something about this situation was different. The post-ceremony gathering for the American personnel was held in an elegant room within the palace complex. Food and refreshments were provided, and the Marines were encouraged to relax and enjoy the historic surroundings. Military protocol was relaxed somewhat, allowing for casual conversation and the sharing of experiences from the morning's events. Michael's fellow Marines were full of enthusiasm about the ceremony and their role in it. Several mentioned the professionalism and precision of the British Guards, with particular note made of the female guard who had caught everyone's attention. The comments were respectful and admiring, focusing on her obvious competence and bearing rather than anything inappropriate. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had served alongside Michael in Afghanistan, noticed his friend's distracted state. "You've been quiet since the ceremony ended," he observed. "Everything all right, Torres?" Michael deflected the question with humor, but Rodriguez wasn't easily fooled. He had known Michael long enough to recognize when something significant was occupying his thoughts. Meanwhile, in a similar gathering for the British personnel, Emma was experiencing her own form of distraction. Her colleagues in the Royal Guards were discussing the technical aspects of the ceremony and the professionalism displayed by the American Marines. Like their American counterparts, the British soldiers had been impressed by the quality and bearing of their foreign colleagues. Corporal James Henderson, who had served with Emma since her assignment to the Royal Guards, noticed her unusual quietness. Emma was typically one of the more engaged participants in post-duty discussions, often providing insightful analysis of ceremonial procedures and suggesting improvements for future events. Her subdued demeanor was distinctly out of character. "Penny for your thoughts, Whitmore?" Henderson asked during a lull in the conversation. Emma deflected with a comment about the complexity of the morning's maneuvers, but Henderson's knowing look suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He had seen enough service to recognize when a fellow soldier was dealing with something beyond routine military concerns. As both gatherings continued, neither Michael nor Emma could fully engage with their respective social obligations. Their thoughts kept returning to those brief moments of connection, and both found themselves wondering about the possibilities that might exist if circumstances were different. The rigid structure of military protocol had kept them apart, but the memory of their encounter seemed to grow stronger rather than fade. The American Marines were scheduled to depart for their base within the next 2 hours, while the Royal Guards would return to their regular duties at various royal residences. Under normal circumstances, there would be no opportunity for further interaction between personnel from the two units. Military regulations and diplomatic protocols were specifically designed to prevent such complications. However, as Michael prepared to leave with his unit, an unexpected announcement changed everything. A senior British officer appeared in the gathering room to inform the American personnel that there had been a delay in their transportation arrangements. A mechanical issue with their assigned vehicle meant they would need to wait approximately 3 hours for replacement transport to arrive, rather than confine the Marines to the palace complex during the delay. The British host decided to offer them a guided tour of selected public areas of the building. This gesture of hospitality was intended to make the best of an unfortunate situation while showcasing some of Britain's most treasured historical sites. The tour would include areas where British military personnel routinely conducted their duties, creating the possibility for another encounter between the Americans and the Royal Guards. As Michael learned of this development, he felt a surge of hope that surprised him with its intensity. Perhaps fate was providing an opportunity he had thought was lost forever, unknown to Michael. Emma had just received similar news about the extended American presence. Her unit was scheduled to conduct routine security patrols through some of the same areas included in the proposed tour route. The possibility of seeing the American Marine again sent an unexpected thrill of anticipation through her. Though she maintained her professional composure outwardly, as both groups prepared for what promised to be an unusual afternoon, neither soldier suspected that their lives were about to intersect again in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about duty, protocol, and the unexpected power of human connection. The guided tour began in the staterooms, where centuries of British history were displayed in magnificent paintings, furniture, and artifacts. Michael found himself genuinely fascinated by the stories. Their guide shared about the palace's role in international diplomacy and military history. The Marine in him appreciated the strategic importance of the building, while the small-town Texas boy marveled at the sheer grandeur of his surroundings. As the group moved through the various chambers, Michael noticed how the other Marines were equally impressed by what they were seeing. Several took photographs when permitted, eager to share evidence of this extraordinary experience with their families back home. The opportunity to see these historic spaces was something most tourists could never access, making it even more special for the visiting serviceman, the tour guide. A retired Royal Navy officer named Commander Phillips had an encyclopedic knowledge of palace history and a gift for storytelling that brought the past to life. He spoke of state dinners where crucial wartime alliances were forged, of secret meetings that shaped the course of world history, and of countless ceremonies that had celebrated the bonds between nations. When the group reached the picture gallery, Commander Phillips paused before a massive painting depicting British and American forces fighting side by side during World War II. The image showed soldiers from both nations advancing together across a European battlefield, their flags intermingled as they pressed forward against enemy positions. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of the Marines present. This painting, Commander Phillips explained, represents the finest tradition of our military partnership. When the stakes were highest and freedom itself hung in the balance, our nations stood together as brothers in arms. That tradition continues today, as demonstrated by this morning's ceremony and by your presence here. As the Marines studied the painting, discussing the historical parallels with their own service experiences, Michael noticed movement in an adjacent corridor. A small patrol of Royal Guards was conducting a routine security sweep, moving with the quiet efficiency that marked all their activities. His pulse quickened as he recognized Emma among the group. Her bearing as perfect as it had been during the morning ceremony, Emma had indeed spotted the American tour group through the doorway of the picture gallery. Her patrol route had been adjusted slightly to ensure the visiting Marines remained in secure areas of the palace, but she hadn't expected to encounter them so directly. When she saw Michael among the group, listening intently to the guide's explanation of the historical painting, she felt that same electric recognition from their morning encounter. Professional protocol required Emma to continue with her patrol duties without acknowledging the Americans beyond basic security considerations. However, as her unit moved past the entrance to the picture gallery, she allowed herself a momentary glance in Michael's direction. To her surprise, he was already looking at her, and their eyes met once again across the formal distance that military regulations maintained between them. This time, the connection lasted several seconds longer than their previous encounters. Neither soldier's expression changed outwardly, both maintained the neutral professionalism required by their positions, but something significant passed between them. It was a recognition that went beyond mere physical attraction, suggesting a deeper compatibility that neither had expected to find. Michael's fellow Marines noticed the exchange immediately. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, positioned next to Michael, observed the silent communication with growing interest. He had known Michael for years and had never seen him react to anyone with such obvious fascination. The fact that the woman in question was not only strikingly beautiful but also clearly a highly competent professional soldier made the situation even more intriguing. As Emma's patrol continued past the gallery entrance. Michael found it difficult to concentrate on Commander Philip's continuing narrative about the palace's wartime history. His attention kept drifting to the corridor where Emma had disappeared, wondering if he might encounter her again before his group's departure. The possibility seemed increasingly remote as the tour schedule would take them through different areas of the palace complex. The Americans were next led to the throne room, where Commander Phillips described the various ceremonial functions that took place in the ornate chamber. The massive throne, ornate ceiling, and crystal chandeliers created an atmosphere of almost overwhelming majesty. Several Marines commented quietly about the contrast between this opulent setting and the austere military bases where they typically served during the throne room presentation. Michael noticed another group of palace staff moving efficiently through background areas, maintaining the building's security and operational requirements even as tours and ceremonies continued. The complexity of coordinating all these activities while maintaining both public access and royal security was clearly enormous, requiring the kind of precision and professionalism he had observed in Emma and her fellow guards. As the tour continued into the palace gardens, Michael began to accept that his brief encounters with Emma were likely to remain just that, momentary connections with no possibility for development. Military protocol, international diplomacy, and simple logistics all conspired against any further interaction between them. The realization brought a sense of disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. However, fate had one more surprise in store. As the American group was examining the famous Rose Garden where countless diplomatic photographs had been taken over the decades, Commander Phillips received a message on his radio. There had been another development with their transportation situation. The replacement vehicle had also experienced mechanical difficulties, extending their stay by several additional hours, rather than confine the Marines to a waiting area for the extended period. Palace officials decided to offer them an even more comprehensive experience. They would be invited to observe a changing of the guard ceremony from a privileged position typically reserved for VIP visitors, followed by a detailed briefing about Royal Guard protocols and traditions. The briefing would be conducted by senior Royal Guard personnel, including officers who could speak authoritatively about the regiment's history, training, and current operations. It was an unprecedented opportunity for American military personnel to gain insight into one of the world's most famous military units. And all the Marines were genuinely excited about the prospect. What none of them knew was that Emma had been selected to participate in the briefing as one of the subject matter experts who would discuss the integration of female personnel into traditionally male military roles. Her experience and articulate communication skills had made her a natural choice for representing the modern Royal Guards to international military visitors. As both groups prepared for this unexpected extended interaction, neither Michael nor Emma was aware that they would soon find themselves in the same room for an extended period, with opportunities for more substantial communication than their previous brief encounters had allowed. The stage was being set for a conversation that would change both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as the various elements of this unplanned encounter began to align. Military efficiency, diplomatic courtesy, and mechanical failures had combined to create circumstances that would test the professional composure of two highly trained soldiers in ways their extensive training had never prepared them to handle. The briefing room was elegant yet functional, with portraits of distinguished royal guards lining the walls and a conference table that had hosted countless military planning sessions over the decades. As the American Marines filed in and took their seats, Michael found himself positioned with a clear view of the presentation area where the British officers would be speaking. Major Catherine Thornwood, the senior Royal Guard officer leading the briefing, was an imposing figure with 20 years of military service and a reputation for both tactical brilliance and diplomatic skill. She had commanded units in 3 different combat zones and was considered one of the most knowledgeable experts on Royal Guard operations and Traditions. Emma entered the room with two other royal guards who would be participating in the presentation. She had changed from her ceremonial uniform into dress blues that were more appropriate for an indoor briefing, though she maintained the same perfect posture and professional bearing that had characterized her earlier appearances. When she saw Michael among the seated Marines, she felt a flutter of nervousness that was completely unlike her usual calm confidence. Michael's reaction was even more pronounced. Seeing Emma in the more intimate setting of the briefing room, without the formal distance of ceremonial formations, made her seem more real and accessible. He found himself studying her face as she took her position at the front of the room, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her presence. Major Thornwood began with a comprehensive overview of Royal Guard history, describing how the unit had evolved from medieval royal bodyguards into a modern military force that combined ceremonial duties with genuine security responsibilities. She spoke of the rigorous selection process, the extensive training requirements, and the high standards of conduct expected from all personnel. When the presentation moved to discuss the integration of women into Royal Guard ranks, Major Thornwood introduced Emma as a subject matter expert who could speak from personal experience about the challenges and opportunities of serving in a traditionally male-dominated military role. Emma stepped forward with practiced confidence, but Michael noticed a slight hesitation in her movement that suggested she was more nervous than her outward appearance indicated. Staff Sergeant Whitmore represents the finest traditions of the Royal Guards while also embodying the evolving nature of military service in the 21st century, Major Thornwood announced. She has distinguished herself in combat operations, ceremonial duties, and training roles, earning the respect of her colleagues through merit rather than any consideration of gender. Emma began speaking in a clear, measured voice that commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. She described her path to the Royal Guards, emphasizing the demanding nature of the selection process and the absolute equality of standards applied to all candidates, regardless of gender. Her presentation was informative and professional, but Michael found himself captivated by more than just the content of her remarks. There was something in Emma's voice, a slight accent that spoke of Northern England, combined with the precise diction required by military protocol, that Michael found absolutely enchanting. Her passion for her service was evident in every word, and her obvious competence and dedication impressed all the Marines present. Several took notes, recognizing valuable insights they could apply to their own military careers. During Emma's presentation about combat operations in Afghanistan, she mentioned experiences that closely paralleled some of Michael's own deployments. She spoke of the challenges of earning credibility in combat units, of proving herself capable under fire, and of the bonds formed with fellow soldiers regardless of their backgrounds or nationalities. Michael found himself nodding in recognition of situations he had faced himself. When Emma concluded her formal remarks, Major Thornwood opened the floor for questions from the visiting Marines. Several asked technical questions about Royal Guard procedures and training, while others inquired about the broader role of British forces in international operations. Emma answered each question with authority and clarity, demonstrating an encyclopedic knowledge of military history and current affairs. Finally, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked a question that made Michael's heart race with anticipation. Staff Sergeant Whitmore, what would you say to American military personnel who are interested in learning more about British military traditions and perhaps establishing professional relationships with their British counterparts? Emma's response was thoughtful and diplomatic. Military partnerships between our nations have always been strongest when built on personal relationships between individual service members, she said. Understanding each other's traditions, sharing experiences, and maintaining communication across national boundaries strengthens both our forces and the alliance they serve. She paused for a moment, and Michael thought he detected her eyes lingering on him just slightly longer than the others as she continued. Professional correspondence and collaboration between soldiers of similar ranks and specialties can be extremely valuable for career development and mutual understanding. Such relationships often prove beneficial long after formal ceremonies like today's have ended. The message seemed directed toward the entire group, but Michael felt certain there was a personal element intended specifically for him, the possibility that Emma might be indicating an interest in further contact sent a surge of hope through him that he struggled to contain while maintaining his military bearing. As the formal Q&A session concluded, Major Thornwood announced that there would be a brief informal reception where the American and British personnel could interact more casually before the Marines' transportation finally arrived. Protocol would be relaxed slightly, allowing for individual conversations while still maintaining appropriate professional standards. During the transition to the reception area, Emma found herself walking near Michael's position in the group. The proximity was the closest they had been to each other all day, and both soldiers felt the tension of unspoken communication hanging between them. Neither spoke directly to the other. Military protocol still required a certain level of formality, but their awareness of each other was palpable. The reception area was set up with light refreshments and comfortable seating arrangements that encouraged small group conversations. As the two units mingled, natural clusters formed around shared interests and experiences. Michael found himself in a group discussing combat operations in Afghanistan, while Emma joined a conversation about the evolution of military traditions in modern armed forces. However, both soldiers remained acutely aware of the other's position in the room. Michael found excuses to move around the reception area, ostensibly to examine historical displays on the walls, but actually positioning himself where he could observe Emma's interactions with other personnel. Similarly, Emma's attention was divided between her conversations and her awareness of Michael's movements, the careful dance of mutual interest within the constraints of military protocol created a tension that several other personnel began to notice. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez exchanged meaningful glances with Corporal Henderson, both recognizing the signs of attraction despite their colleagues' efforts to maintain professional composure. As the reception continued, the informal atmosphere gradually allowed for more relaxed interactions between the American and British personnel. Stories were shared about training experiences, deployments, and military life in general. The common bonds of service began to override national differences, creating the kind of camaraderie that had characterized military partnerships between the two countries for generations. It was during this more relaxed phase of the reception that fate finally provided the opportunity both Michael and Emma had been hoping for throughout the long afternoon. The moment arrived when Michael found himself examining a display case containing medals and insignia from various Royal Guard units throughout history. Emma approached the same display from the opposite side, ostensibly to explain some of the historical significance to a small group of Marines who had gathered around the exhibit. For the first time all day, they were standing close enough to speak directly to each other without violating protocol. The Victoria Cross there belonged to Sergeant Major William Hayes, Emma said to the group, but her eyes met Michael's as she spoke. He earned it during the Battle of Rorke's Drift, where a small British force held off thousands of Zulu warriors for 2 days. It's considered one of the finest examples of military courage in our history. Michael studied the medal with genuine interest before responding. We have similar stories in Marine Corps' history, he said, addressing the group but clearly speaking to Emma. The Medal of Honor recipients who held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. There's something about that kind of courage that transcends nationality. Indeed, Emma replied, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been present in her formal presentation. Courage and dedication to duty are universal military virtues. They create bonds between soldiers regardless of the flags they serve under. The conversation continued with others joining in, but Michael and Emma maintained a subtle dialogue within the larger discussion. They discovered shared experiences from their respective deployments, similar challenges they had faced as professional soldiers, and remarkably compatible views on military service and leadership. Other personnel in the group began to drift away, drawn to other exhibits and conversations. Eventually, Only Michael and Emma remained near the display case, still maintaining the pretense of examining historical artifacts while engaging in their first real conversation. The tension that had built throughout the day began to transform into something warmer and more comfortable as they discovered how much they had in common. "Your presentation earlier was impressive," Michael said quietly. "It takes real courage to be a pioneer in any military role, and you've obviously succeeded through merit alone." Emma felt a flush of pride at the genuine respect in his voice. "Thank you. I've noticed your combat ribbons, Afghanistan and Iraq deployments. I served in Helmand Province myself. The American forces we worked with there were exceptional professionals." "Helmand was challenging," Michael acknowledged. "We partnered with some British units there. Your people know how to soldier." He paused, then added more personally, "I'm Michael Torres, by the way. Sergeant, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines." "Emma Whitmore, Staff Sergeant, Grenadier Guards," she replied, extending her hand for a handshake that lasted perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "It's a pleasure to meet you properly, Sergeant Torres." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Major Thornwood, who announced that the American transportation had finally arrived and departure procedures would begin shortly. The news brought a mixture of relief and disappointment to both Michael and Emma. Relief that the logistical complications were finally resolved, but disappointment that their brief opportunity for connection was about to end. As the Marines began gathering their equipment and preparing for departure, Michael realized this might be his only chance to take the initiative. Emma had suggested during her earlier remarks about professional correspondence between soldiers of similar ranks. Military protocol made it impossible to pursue anything beyond professional contact, but that avenue remained open if he had the courage to pursue it. "Staff Sergeant Whitmore," he said formally, as other personnel moved around them preparing for the departure. "You mentioned earlier that professional correspondence between American and British service members could be beneficial for career development and mutual understanding." Emma's heart rate increased as she recognized the direction of his comment. "Yes, I believe strongly in that principle," she replied carefully. "Military partnerships are strengthened when individual soldiers maintain communication about professional matters, training opportunities, and shared experiences." Michael nodded, understanding the careful language required by their situation. "I would be very interested in maintaining such professional correspondence, particularly with someone who has experience in both ceremonial duties and combat operations. Would that be appropriate within military regulations?" "Absolutely," Emma said, perhaps a bit too quickly before catching herself. "Professional correspondence between allied military personnel is encouraged by our respective chains of command. It promotes understanding and cooperation between our forces." They were both speaking in the formal language required by protocol, but the subtext was clear to both of them. Michael was asking for permission to write to her, and Emma was not only granting that permission but encouraging it. Within the constraints of military regulations and international diplomacy, they had found a way to continue their connection beyond this single day. "I'll need to go through proper channels to obtain your contact information," Michael said, still maintaining the professional facade while his pulse raced with excitement. "Of course," Emma replied. "Major Thornwood can provide appropriate contact. Protocols for professional correspondence with Royal Guard personnel. Such communications are routinely facilitated for legitimate military purposes." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Major Thornwood approached them, carrying a folder of documents. "Sergeant Torres, I understand you're interested in maintaining professional correspondence with Staff Sergeant Whitmore regarding comparative military traditions and operational experiences." Michael was surprised that the Major had apparently been monitoring their conversation, but her expression was neutral and businesslike. "Yes, ma'am. I believe such correspondence could be valuable for both personal professional development and broader military cooperation." "Excellent," Major Thornwood replied, handing him a card from her folder. "This contains the appropriate contact information for professional correspondence with Royal Guard personnel. All communications should be copied to the designated liaison officer to ensure proper protocol is maintained." Emma felt a surge of gratitude toward her commanding officer, who had obviously recognized the situation and chosen to facilitate rather than obstruct the connection. Major Thornwood's intervention suggested that such professional relationships were not only permitted but actively encouraged when they served broader military partnership goals. Michael accepted the card with carefully controlled enthusiasm. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your assistance with this professional courtesy." "Not at all," Major Thornwood replied. "Building relationships between our personnel serves both our nation's interests. Staff Sergeant Whitmore is an excellent representative of Royal Guard professionalism and will undoubtedly provide valuable insights into British military traditions." As the final departure announcements echoed through the palace corridors, Michael and Emma faced their farewell with a mixture of sadness and anticipation. They had spent only a few hours in each other's company, but both sensed that something significant had begun that neither wanted to see end with their physical separation. "It's been an honor meeting you, Staff Sergeant Whitmore," Michael said formally, extending his hand for a final handshake. "The honor was mine, Sergeant Torres," Emma replied, taking his hand and meeting his eyes directly. "I look forward to our professional correspondence and to learning more about American military traditions from your perspective." Their handshake lasted exactly the appropriate duration for a formal military farewell, but the intensity in both their eyes conveyed everything that protocol prevented them from saying aloud. As Michael turned to join his departing unit, both soldiers knew that this was not really an ending but rather the beginning of something that would unfold through carefully worded letters and professional communications that carried much deeper meaning than their formal language would suggest. 3 weeks later, Michael sat in his quarters at Marine Corps Base Quantico, staring at a blank sheet of paper as he composed his first letter to Emma. Military correspondence required a careful balance between professional formality and genuine personal interest, and he had already discarded several draft attempts that failed to strike the right tone. The letter that finally emerged was a masterpiece of diplomatic communication. Michael wrote about comparative military traditions, shared experiences in combat zones, and the value of international military cooperation, embedded within the professional language, however, were personal observations and questions that conveyed his genuine interest in Emma as both a soldier and a person. Emma's response arrived 2 weeks later, bearing the official Royal Guard letterhead and maintaining the same careful balance between professional courtesy and personal warmth. She wrote about British military history, training protocols, and her experiences serving in various ceremonial and operational roles. Between the lines, her intelligence, humor, and growing interest in her American correspondent were clearly evident. Their correspondence quickly developed into a regular exchange that both soldiers eagerly anticipated. Letters arrived every 2 to 3 weeks, each one slightly longer and more personal than the last, while still maintaining the professional facade required by military regulations. They shared stories about their families, their motivations for military service, their hopes for future assignments, and their observations about military life. Michael learned that Emma had grown up on a rural estate where she developed her love of horses and outdoor activities. Her decision to join the military had surprised some family members who expected her to pursue a more traditional career, but her father's naval background had given him a deep appreciation for her choice. She had excelled in everything from combat training to diplomatic protocol, earning rapid promotions and increasing responsibilities. Emma discovered that Michael came from a working-class family that had sacrificed significantly to support his education and military career. His deployment experiences had matured him beyond his years, and his natural leadership abilities had earned him the respect of both superiors and subordinates. His letters revealed a thoughtful, caring person who took his responsibilities seriously while maintaining a sense of humor about military bureaucracy. 6 months into their correspondence, their letters had evolved from purely professional exchanges to something much more personal, though still carefully coded within acceptable military language. They wrote about their dreams for the future, their perspectives on military service, and increasingly personal observations about life relationships, and the challenges of maintaining connections across military and international boundaries. The breakthrough came when Michael was selected for a joint training exercise that would bring American forces to Britain for 6 weeks of cooperative operations. The exercise would include ceremonial duties at various royal residences, meaning there was a strong possibility he would encounter Emma again in an official capacity. His letter informing her of this development barely contained his excitement despite its professional tone. Emma's response was equally enthusiastic, though equally constrained by protocol. She mentioned that Royal Guard personnel would be heavily involved in the training exercise, particularly in areas related to ceremonial procedures and security protocols. Reading between the lines, Michael understood that she would likely be assigned to work directly with the American forces. When Michael arrived in Britain for the training exercise, the reunion took place during a formal briefing session similar to their first encounter. However, this time both soldiers were prepared for the intensity of their connection and better able to manage their reactions while maintaining professional composure. The 6-week exercise provided numerous opportunities for official interaction. Michael and Emma found themselves working together on joint ceremonial procedures, participating in combined training scenarios, and attending professional development sessions. Their colleagues in both forces began to notice the obvious rapport between them, though both maintained absolute professionalism in their official duties. It was during the 4th week of the exercise that Emma made a carefully calculated decision. At a joint social event designed to promote camaraderie between American and British personnel, she approached Michael during a moment when they could speak privately without violating protocol. "Michael," she said quietly, using his first name for the first time since their initial meeting, "I need to tell you something that I haven't been able to express in our letters. This partnership we've developed has become much more important to me than professional correspondence." Michael felt his heart race as he realized Emma was finally acknowledging what had been growing between them for months. "Emma, I've felt the same way since our first meeting. These months of letters have only strengthened my conviction that what we have is special and worth pursuing." They were interrupted before they could say more, but both understood that a threshold had been crossed. The remainder of the exercise took on a different quality, as they worked together with the knowledge that their feelings were mutual and that they would need to find a way to navigate the complex regulations and practical challenges facing their relationship. The solution came from an unexpected source. Major Thornwood, who had been observing the situation with professional interest, approached them both during the final week of the exercise. "I believe you both should know that there are established procedures for international military relationships," she said diplomatically. "Such relationships, when properly documented and approved, can actually strengthen military cooperation between our nations." Emma felt a surge of hope as her commanding officer continued. "There are precedents for British and American military personnel maintaining personal relationships while serving their respective countries. The key is ensuring proper notification, maintaining professional standards, and recognizing that such relationships can serve broader diplomatic purposes." The final resolution came when both Michael and Emma submitted formal requests to their respective chains of command for permission to pursue a personal relationship. The requests were carefully worded to emphasize the positive aspects for military cooperation and international relations, while acknowledging the personal nature of their connection. 6 months later, Michael received orders for a permanent assignment to the American Embassy in London as a military liaison officer. Emma was simultaneously assigned to increased responsibilities involving coordination with American military personnel. Neither assignment was coincidental. Their superiors had recognized both the personal relationship and its potential value for ongoing military cooperation. Their wedding took place 2 years later in a small ceremony attended by military personnel from both nations. Major Thornwood served as one of Emma's official witnesses, while Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stood as Michael's best man. The ceremony was conducted according to both American and British military traditions, symbolizing the international partnership that had brought them together. As they exchanged vows in their respective dress uniforms, surrounded by colleagues who had watched their relationship develop from that first moment of eye contact during a ceremonial parade. Both Michael and Emma reflected on the unexpected paths that military service could create. What had begun as a moment of mutual attraction during a formal ceremony had evolved into a partnership that strengthened not only their personal lives, but also the military alliance between their two nations. Their story became something of a legend within both the Marine Corps and the Royal Guards, proof that even within the rigid structure of military protocol, genuine human connections could find a way to flourish and grow into something beautiful and enduring.